I was involved in Orthodox Judaism at a young age. I adopted it when I was about 13 or 14. And it really had a lot of meaning to me. I was in a really horrible neighborhood and had some terrible influences on me. And it really saved me from some darkness. And I was very observant. I used to go to temple and eat kosher food and all that. And my mother said I was 60 before I was 18, like a little old man. And after a while, it kind of ran its course. And I wasn't inspired anymore. And I was doing things kind of out of rote and obligation. And one day there was a fast day. We weren't supposed to eat. And I was sitting alone at home one evening, and I was really hungry.
Cake.
And I didn't really know why I was fasting. The basic reason was that somebody told me to, and I was afraid I'd go to hell if I didn't do it properly. And this realization gobsmacked me. I like that word, gobsmack, the realization that doing a religious act out of fear was not a reason to do a religious act. And if I couldn't do it out of choice and joy and celebration, then it wasn't worth it. So I ate a piece of cake.
Cake.
And that was the end of Judaism for me.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 604, Alan Cohen and A Course in Miracles Made Easy. Now, I met Alan earlier this year and was immediately attracted to his grounding nature, his easygoing sense of peace and optimism and encouragement. Alan is a best-selling author and speaker. He's published 27 books, including A Course in Miracles Made Easy, which we're going to talk about a little bit today. Other books include The Dragon Doesn't Live Here Anymore, the award-winning A Deep Breath of Life, and the classic Are You As Happy As Your Dog? Alan is a well-respected life coach with over 20 years of experience, which is how I've met him and how I've come to know him. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Alan onto the podcast today. So without any further ado, let's get right to it. So Alan, thank you for coming on and being my guest today. It feels a little strange having you as my guest because I've been your guest briefly on your radio show, and you've been mentoring me for the last however many months with your coaching class. But I really wanted to bring you on to the podcast and share who you are with my listeners. I'd like to talk a little bit about your book, A Course in Miracles Made Easy. And, you've got this quote, and I've used this quote on the podcast before, that someone has said that religion is for people who are afraid of hell, and spirituality is for people who have already been there.
Yeah.
And I know that's not your quote, but that it's one that you're fond of and you say.
Well, would you like me to riff on that particular quote for a moment?
Sure.
I was involved in Orthodox Judaism at a young age. I adopted it when I was about 13 or 14. And it really had a lot of meaning to me. I was in a really horrible neighborhood and had some terrible influences on me. And it really saved me from some darkness. And I was very observant. I used to go to temple and eat kosher food and all that. And my mother said I was 60 before I was 18,
Yeah.
like a little old man. And after a while, it kind of ran its course. And I wasn't inspired anymore. And I was doing things kind of out of rote and obligation. And one day there was a fast day. We weren't supposed to eat. And I was sitting alone at home one evening, and I was really hungry. And I didn't really know why I was fasting. The basic reason was that somebody told me to.
Yeah.
And I was afraid I'd go to hell if I didn't do it properly. And this realization gobsmacked me. I like that word, gobsmack, the realization that doing a religious act out of fear was not a reason to do a religious act.
Mm.
And if I couldn't do it out of choice and joy and celebration, then it wasn't worth it. So I ate a piece of cake. And that was the end of Judaism for me. I kind of, it just catapulted me on a whole new path. I won't go into it, but I explored all kinds of things and met all kinds of teachers and had challenges and ecstasies and, wonderful things I never would have had within the context of that religion, which I certainly still respect. But it was a turning point for me, recognizing that if I couldn't live from a sense of integrity with myself, then it really wasn't worth it. And it changed my life. It was one of the big turning points in my life.
When you ate that piece of cake, the piece of cake that changed your world, how old were you?
19, 20, somewhere in there.
Okay. All right. And when you and I don't know what it was like for you walking away from the Judaism, but did you have any anger about it? Had you felt that you had been constrained? Your mom saying that you were 60 before you were 18. Did you feel like you had missed out on things?
Not at the time. I really loved Judaism and it really worked for me. But I did feel like, I think one of the reasons I left it was that I felt like I was missing out. Like all my friends were going to parties and senior proms and having girlfriends and having sex and all that. And I wasn't. And so I feel like my teenager years were kind of like, they weren't lost by any means, but I didn't grow up in the same way that other kids had.
Yeah.
I went back and had sex later. But
Yeah. Right.
I made up for it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't angry about it. I bear no ill will toward the religion. It's not for me in the way that it was, but it works for some people. It works for a lot of people.
Well, and the reason I ask, I know your partner Dee now has some experience with Mormonism. She was raised Mormon and is probably aware of the, there's a lot of anger that ex-Mormons will feel. And I found it interesting as you were coming to your I'm just going to eat cake realization that it was based on this idea of fear, that I don't want to be practicing religion out of fear. I want it to be uplifting. So maybe we could explore that a little bit more, and with my listeners in mind who might be in a place of either fear or anger, or they've come out of this religion of Mormonism. And I think a lot of people want to find meaning and value, but aren't quite sure where to trust, aren't quite sure where to go. So anything that you could speak to from your experience there?
Yeah, well, as you know, I've become a student of A Course in Miracles.
Yeah.
And A Course in Miracles says that each of us has guidance from God. They call it the Holy Spirit. It's one name for it. Some people call it intuition, deep knowing. And, at some point, we have to remove the umbilicus from external authority and find authority from within.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of tricky because we can talk ourselves into things that are not helpful. But, I know, Glenn, that when I've had major choice points in my life, whether it's relationships, finance, health, career, I have consulted a deep inner knowing that works. And I think somebody who has left or considering leaving Mormonism would definitely have to consider the possibility that God will speak to them from their own heart, rather than being filtered through another person or some panel of quote experts that may or may not have anything to do with your life.
Yeah. How do you communicate that idea to people who have rejected the notion of God altogether, and they've said God was one of those things that kept me trapped in that religion? It was a lie that I'm not going to believe anymore.
Well, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. All religions started out with some form of divine inspiration. unfortunately, in many religions, it gets watered down and diluted and polluted with guilt and fear and human. I think Voltaire said that God created us in His image and likeness, and then we return the compliment.
Yeah.
So we make up all kinds of stories about God that reflect human frailty, not divine reality. And so, I think a mature spiritual person uses discernment to separate that which is true within a religion or without a religion from that which is not. And I'm not hung up on people calling God God. I don't think God cares that much. You can call it love, you can call it life, you can call it life force, the Tao. There are many, many different names for that force that we in the West call God. And I agree, unfortunately, the word God has been sullied by people who have projected vengeance and wrath onto God when it just doesn't exist. So, if it's too much of a stretch to call God God, fine. Call him Frank or Susan or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. It's an energy. It's a life force. It's a love, and names are human. God is truly nameless. When Moses asked God, "What's your name?" He said, "I am," and that's kind of the closest we can get to naming God, really.
Yeah. I want to read this to you. It's funny. I put out a survey for the podcast a couple of years ago, and people don't really go to the website and fill out the survey much anymore, but every once in a while a listener will find it and they'll fill it out. And so this came to me this morning, and there's this question that says, what do you like about the podcast, etc. And the answer is, I liked everything until Glenn went full woo. Listening to unscientific BS is like grading fingernails on a chalkboard. If I wanted that, I would go back to church. And yet, in the question before, he gave me 4 out of 5 stars for good. So it's not that bad. But so I'm always very sensitive of this accusation of woo. Anytime I get into this idea of talking about God or spirituality, and I think probably what they were referring to is I did a 2-part series where I reviewed Joe Dispenza's recent. I don't know if you've seen this. He did a TV series on Gaia called Rewired, and he's talking about the brain and the impact that thoughts have. And yeah, I don't understand when people think that that's woo.
He's pretty scientific. He's a doctor, right. And he's far to the left, as far to the right, as far as I can tell. Yeah. He's very conservative. So I don't know why somebody would call him woo, but. We all make up stories about what we want to believe, and that's fine.
Sure. So what are your thoughts on thoughts and the impact that our thoughts, our internal world, our thoughts have on our reality?
Well, thoughts are very creative. A Course in Miracles says there's no such thing as an idle thought. And it says that which gives rise to an entire world can hardly be called idle. So thoughts are powerful. And I used to know this healer, and he said that we walk in the atmosphere of our own believing. And people in the New Age movement, they say you create your reality. Well, that's a half truth. Reality has already been created very nicely. Thank you very much. Yeah. And it is what it is. But we do create our experience of reality. So you can make up a story about what is and what isn't, and then you live in your story. And you bear the fruits of that story, for better or worse. Yeah. So we have to be. Someone said that A Course in Miracles is really about mind training.
Yeah,
it's about lining our thoughts up with that which works instead of that which doesn't. So eventually we have to face our thoughts. You cannot get around it. Our thoughts are powerful. They can kill and they can cure.
Yeah, yeah. I came across, and it was maybe a year or two ago. Cognitive behavioral therapy and a book called Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's been around for a long time. And when I started listening to the Abraham Hicks recordings earlier this year, I recognized, even though she was presenting these ideas in a very different way, like channeled information from pure positive energy, the message was so consistent with what I was hearing from Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. And when she would talk about things like the law of attraction, and she would describe or define what she meant by law of attraction, it just became so clear to me that it was identical to confirmation bias. And you know that once you make up your mind that something is
Yeah.
a certain way, you're going to get confirmation of that bias that you're holding all over the place. You're going to be
Yeah.
blind to the things that disconfirm that. And so I don't know. I like the woo. When people accuse me of going into the woo, I think it's really interesting because all of it is an expression of different ways that people view the world and how they want to express themselves in it.
Yeah.
And anyway, I just find it really, really interesting, really valuable. And when you can compare those things and see the similarities, it makes it even stronger for me.
Well, truth comes through many different channels. Ram Dass used to say that it's as if God is writing with different colored magic markers.
Yeah.
That the Course in Miracles came through a woman who was a psychotherapist, and so the language is very psychological. But if she was a musician, it would have been musical,
Yeah.
and she spoke French, it would have come through in French.
Right.
So, and I do remember some things from Judaism, and there was one phrase, Dibrei Torah b'lashon b'nei Adam, which means that the Torah, the Bible, speaks in the language of people.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's pretty clever that Spirit sends prophets and teachers and healers who speak all kinds of different languages and different terms to reach people who are familiar and comfortable with those languages. And it's all set up so that there's healing available within each community. So it's a pretty clever system when you think about it.
Yeah. And unavoidable that I like to think of God now as source energy. I think that's been what the moniker that I've settled on and feel most comfortable with. And I think of it as the energy that is behind the subatomic energy, the atoms, the molecules, the cells, and everything. And if I think about it that way, then the way that energy is expressing myself is pretty much anything that's coming up through the way that I think, through the way that I express myself. And it's all being, and it's the same for you. It's the same for everybody. Everybody has this connection to that source energy, whatever it is. And so it makes sense that it would come up in different languages and cultures and people's different experiences. I wouldn't expect it to all look the same as it's being filtered through all of these different.
How boring it would be.
Right.
Yeah. And it's not just that we're connected to source energy, we're extensions of it.
Yes, right.
Connection kind of implies that we're here and source energy is there, and there's this little sort of tether between us. But really, I like to think of it that, if God is the sun or source is the sun, we are rays of the sun.
Yeah.
And the rays of the sun contain all the attributes of the sun. Each ray is not the whole sun, S-U-N, but each ray contains all the elements of the sun. So it is one with the sun. That's how I like to think of us as being extensions of source.
Yeah, and the first thing I thought of when you brought up that metaphor were the plants that photosynthesize the sun and they bring it into themselves to grow, and like that's an extension that's being sourced by the sun too. And all right, so you've mentioned A Course in Miracles a couple of times. You started talking about the author of it, that she was a psychotherapist. Could you give a little bit of background of what it is and then how you first were introduced to it?
Yeah, it's an amazing story. In brief, this woman, Helen Schuckman, was a psychology professor at Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons, and she was not getting along with her supervisor, Bill Thetford. But she was an interesting person because even though she was a Jewish by culture, atheist by philosophy, a cynical, hard-boiled personality, she also had this very, very soft and devotional side. Plus, she was terrifically psychic, believe it or not. She had a lot of psychic experiences. And one day, her Bill came to her and said, "There must be a better way, Helen." And she said, "Yes." And because they weren't getting along. And a few weeks later, this voice came to her and said, "This is A Course in Miracles. Please take notes." Now, she regularly therapized people who heard voices.
Right.
And not only did the voice tell her to take notes, it said, "This is Jesus Christ,"
Uh-huh.
which was, double indemnity as a psychotherapist. And so she was scared bleepless to do anything with this. And she went to Bill and said, "Bill, this voice is coming to me saying, 'This is, of course, a miracle. Please take notes. What should I do?'" And he said, "Well, why don't you take notes?" And so she started taking this dictation, whatever she heard, and she brought it to him. He said, "This is fantastic. I want to work with you on this." So she would take shorthand every night at home, and then they would go into his office every morning and close the shade, and he would type. He was a typist. So this went on for 7 years until he had this very thick manuscript called The Course in Miracles. And it's basically some call it spiritual psychotherapy, some call it mind training. It's almost like Zen in some way. Buddha, it's not, it's written in Christian language, but it's really universal. And it basically is a system of mind training that takes us by the hand and leads us from fear to love. And it talks a lot about forgiveness. It says that every moment is a choice between love and fear. Fear never works and love always works. And in a very gentle way, over 365 days, is one lesson per day for a year. It basically turns your mind inside out and helps you recognize that what we've been taught about how life works is pretty much not it. And it substitutes our spiritual identity for our body identity. It substitutes uplifted relationships for painful relationships. So it's very profound, or it's very deep. It takes a lot of commitment. But I've been with it for, God bless me, almost 40 years. I'm not really that old, but that's how long I've been with it. And I've never seen anything quite like it. It doesn't deny any religion. There's people from many religions who participate in it, but it's very, it's soothing, it's healing, it's illuminating, and it makes life work. That's my experience.
Yeah. And now I have two of your audiobooks. I have The Tao Made Easy and A Course in Miracles Made Easy. And I love both of them, but A Course in Miracles Made Easy, I listened to it at a time where I was going through a lot of like really challenge. And there were times I would fall asleep listening to it, and it was great because I'd wake up in the middle and like something would catch my attention. I'm like, whoa.
That's cool.
And I think one of the first things that really caught my attention that way about it was maybe it's chapter 7, but it's when it's special love versus holy love. And boy, that just the idea and the definition of what special love is versus holy love was so powerful to me. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's one of the key components of the course. And the course also says that the fastest road to healing is through relationships. It says, you've been taught many avenues and they all work, but if you really want to change your life, start addressing your relationships and heal them, which is challenging for a lot of us because a lot of us have relationships that are out of whack. And it says that we tend to see ourselves as empty or broken or needy. And then we go searching for a person or thing or money or job or place to live that's going to fill us in and make us whole. And it says, in the moment we go searching, we have divested ourselves of our true power because we're already whole. And anytime you attempt to import something that will make you whole, it never works because you're already whole. So it really urges us in all of our relationships with people, money, things, to come from sense of enoughness, come from wholeness. And that's what it calls a holy relationship, where you're not looking to get and to be fixed and to be filled. And when you proceed from wholeness, everything works in a way that it never worked when you were looking for somebody special. I know it's kind of almost sacrilege to say, well, you shouldn't search for somebody special. Well, you can search for a partner. It's all wonderful. Partners are wonderful. But if you're looking for a partner to make you something that you're not, you sabotage a relationship before it begins. And a lot of our journey of relationship is shifting from specialness to holiness. Certainly mine is. I'm an expert on special relationships. I had 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
So, so I'm qualified to talk about it.
So what are, when I think about this idea of having a sense of brokenness, having a sense of innate unworthiness. We have the story of original sin that everyone, in Christian traditions, and Mormonism has this as well, this idea that God formed life on this earth in perfection, but then sin is what was introduced, that promulgated life, through Eve's sin in the Garden of Eden and all of that. So people really have this sense coming in that they're not worthy, that there's things, that there are conditions that are placed on worthiness. And it's one of the things that when I was working my way out of the Mormon church, there were teachings that were consistent with this idea of being worthy and holy already, and then these things that were kind of inconsistent that just didn't really make sense to me. But I think a lot of people have this sense really, really deep in the subconscious that they're not enough. They're not enough. They've got to do something before they're enough, before it's okay. What has your experience been with that?
Well, that's all learned. Children are born pure and innocent, and you're a father. You have lovely children, and you love your kids. I don't have human kids, but we have 5 dogs, and they're certainly like our kids. And I think people love to be around children and pets because they're so innocent, and they're honest, and they're naked, and they're not ashamed, and they're not guilty. And they remind us of who we were before we were trained to believe that we're guilty or lacking in some way. And the good news is that we still are that. It's just that it's been covered over with a lot of BS that distracts us from our true nature. So, I would substitute original sin with original error, where, a famous yogi said, we started out fine, and then we got defined. So now we're getting refined. So, at a young age, we were given definitions. Boys do this and girls do that. Good Mormons do that and bad Mormons do that, on and on. And we just were loaded up with, Jesus said, don't put a bushel over the light. Don't put a basket over the light. And so, the spiritual path is really about removing the light is there. The light has always been there. The light, it can never not be there. The light will never go away. It's who we are. But we have succeeded in covering that light with a basket, and the spiritual path is really about removing that basket from the light, so we can be who we were before we were trained to the contrary.
So that sounds to me like living a life that's free of judgment.
Yeah,
is that possible?
It is. I know people who claim to have gotten there. I haven't. I still have judgments, but less and less as I go along. But judgment is when the human mind, the intellect, comes in and sort of preempts our divine knowingness and squeezes us into small boxes and labels, and that's where we get all screwed up. Someone wrote a book called "Love It, Don't Label It," and labels. I think Mark Twain said, comparison is the thief of joy. And so we start counting and comparing, then we get all, I'm not as good as him, and I'm better than him. And that's what really tweaks us and whacks us to the side. So, the Course in Miracles does seek to lift us beyond judgment. And one of its lessons is, today I will just let all things be exactly as they are.
Yeah.
And judgment means you should be different, I should be different, the world should be different, politics should be different, that tree should be different. And not that we can't seek positive change, which is always helpful, but this idea that there's something really wrong and we better fix it, otherwise we're going to be in big trouble, that's a form of judgment.
Yeah.
And brought down to interpersonal relationships, how many people try to fix each other in a marriage, which is really the source of, they say that a woman marries a man with the expectation they'll change, and a man marries a woman with the expectation she'll never change. And herein is a source of all problems in marriage. And I think it's pretty true, actually.
That's funny. When I got interested in that book, Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns, he lists several cognitive distortions. And one of those cognitive distortions is black and white thinking. Another one is putting things into should statements. discounting the positive, catastrophizing, all of these kinds of things. And I think that the way that our brains automatically, especially the older we get, have been conditioned to make these comparisons, to make these judgments, and then to feel the lack that we don't measure up to something. It really does bring a lot of despair. and so going back to what the Course in Miracles says about the special relationship versus the holy relationship, I think the thing that really jumped out to me was that if you are expecting someone else to complete something in you, you're kind of sabotaging yourself right from the beginning.
Exactly.
And as it becomes more and more clear that they can't complete you, they can't do this, then there's the resentment that builds up, and that these special love relationships often turn very acrimonious,
dark.
Dark, and just angry. Whereas a holy relationship, if you have two people who recognize that they aren't broken, they're not going to fix each other, they accept, and this is where I kind of get tripped up with this, Alan, that we accept ourselves even in our flaws. I'm acknowledging that there are flaws, but then that kind of goes against the idea that we're whole and that we're complete. So help me out with this one.
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? On the level of personality and human interaction, there are flaws. I have flaws. You have flaws. Everybody has personality quirks and weirdnesses, and sometimes de-criticizes me, my partner, because I'll have like a small glass of soy milk and I'll just put half of it back in the refrigerator. She says, "Why don't you throw it out? I want to save it." So I have my little quirks, right? We all do. So it's just part of human nature to have stuff going on. But I think the idea is that even behind our personality quirks and judgments and deficits, we are whole. That the Course makes a big distinction between the body and the spirit. It says that you get into trouble because you believe you are a body only. And you identify with a body, and whatever's going on with the body you think is going on with you. And it's true only to a certain extent, because far below the body, we have a spiritual nature that transcends anything and everything that could happen with the body. And so, this is how a healer heals. A healer sees the perfection in somebody and holds firmly to that, even in the face of human flaws that may be happening simultaneously. So, our spiritual empowerment lies in dropping into the place inside us that is whole, even in spite of what happens to be going on in the personality of the moment, even in spite of appearances, even in spite of the appearance of illness, there's wholeness and wellness happening simultaneously. And that's, some people might think that's woo, but if you don't like the woo, you can stay in the poo. You're really pretty much at every moment choosing between the two.
Okay. Well, that nice bumper sticker moment there. When I hear you talk about the spirituality that's a deep part of our being, I thought about the way that our body, and if I do focus just on the body, I think I can still get to the spirituality elements of it, that the body that we have now isn't the same body that we had 10 years ago. The cells that we have aren't the same cells. I've got cells that are dying all the time and that are being, replaced all of the time. And that process is happening regardless of anything that I'm thinking about or doing. And so that's kind of where I focus on, to think things are perfect, things are whole. It's an abundant universe. I'm getting replicated all of the time. Do I get sickness? Do I get disease? Yes. Do I think that that's something that is unnatural? No, it's part of nature. I mean, we all age, we all, get to that point where we die, we deteriorate, but our body's constantly being replaced and regenerated. And there is something that's doing that's bigger than we are. And that's where we can put, and I'm saying we, I really should say that's where I put my trust in those times where I don't know what's going to come next. And
Yeah.
it takes the fear away. It lets me focus on this thing, this abundance that I really can be truly grateful for. And I think that is, and I haven't read A Course in Miracles. I've only read your A Course in Miracles Made Easy. I keep saying, yeah, I'm going to get the course out, and Cammie and I were going to start going through it every day. We're going we do want to do that. But my understanding is The Course in Miracles defines a miracle as a change in perspective. And the biggest change in perspective I've had as I've been contemplating it is the value that gratitude has, the finding gratitude for every single moment. And that's where I find it when I'm contemplating what spirituality is and things that are completely outside of my ability to really know.
Well, it's beautifully stated, Glenn. And the truth is that there is a healing power that goes far beyond human control. If you cut your finger, you don't know how to heal that.
Yeah.
You can cooperate it by putting it with a band-aid on, but there's this thing called life force, and every culture has a name for it: chi, ki, mana, prana. All the cultures say that there is something that heals, and that's far beyond human understanding, and that some people call it God, but it doesn't matter. And I want to capture the last thing you said. The Course says that there's really only two belief systems: love and fear. And when you're in fear, everything is dark, and when you're in love, everything is light. And so you dropping into gratitude is a clear demonstration that when you shift from fear to love, and gratitude is an expression of love, then everything changes. You're like putting on a whole different lenses that give you access to an entirely different universe than you saw when you were stuck in fear. So that's why we, if you're going to take your thoughts and use them, we have to keep pushing ourselves back to the universe of love, because it's the only one that really works.
Yeah. What would the Course say if I suggested that really there is only love, and that fear is just love wearing a mask? Fear is just love in disguise.
Yeah, it's something like that. It's we might call fear a shadow. I love that from the Psalm. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and it doesn't say that I walk through the valley of death; it says I walk through the shadow of death, which means that if you block the light with an erroneous thought, it casts a shadow that does not allow you to see the light in that portion that is blocked. But it, just because a cloud comes doesn't mean the sun has disappeared.
Yeah.
It's just mean the cloud had covered the sun.
Right.
So, all we can say about fear is that's the moment. It's the illusion of the absence of love for a moment.
Yeah.
But it's doesn't mean that love is absent. It just means at that moment you're not aware that love is present.
Yeah.
Which it is everywhere at all times, even when it doesn't look like
right. And I like how the Course says that things are either an expression of love or a call for love. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And this image of the shadow that blocks out the light, creating the illusion that there's no light when that light is actually always there. That's really hard to see when you've trained yourself like I have, to be worried about what's going to happen in the future if I don't do X, Y, or Z, or to interpret the things that happened to me in the past and go, oh, that was bad, that was horrible.
It's all interpretation. Lesson 2 of the Course says that everything I see has only the meaning I've given to it. So at every moment we're projecting meaning onto a neutral universe, and then we get to live in the universe that is supplied by the meaning we've given it. So this is why we have to always strive to interpret in our favor rather than interpret against ourselves. And you talked about the judgment you had and trying to prove yourself. Well, that's all negative interpretation of self, which is never true. The Course says that you are as beautiful and innocent and holy and perfect as you ever were, and nothing. I love that phrase. Speaking of bumper stickers, God loves you and there's nothing you can do about it. That the universe is constantly supporting us We can fight against it and make up stories about it, but we're always supported, we're always loved, we're always in the presence of love, no matter what's going on in the world of appearances. And that's a really crucial word in the Course, that it's only appearances that deceive us, never truth.
All right. So in the time we have remaining, I'd like to talk about what you do as a life coach. How long you've been doing that? What is it?
Well, I was trained in human relations training and interpersonal communications. And I did mostly group work for many, 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 many years. And I discovered that as I was working with people within the group, very often I just single somebody out and I deal with them directly for a while, that those moments of working intensely with somebody and going deep, those are the most powerful moments of the whole program. And then people started using this word coaching. Well, I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm coaching people to become more of who they are. I'm not telling them what to do. I'm helping them. I'm drawing forth the best in them. So about 10 years ago, I thought, well, just for fun, let me start a coach training, because that's what I was doing. We had a dozen people show up, and I was appalled by several things, Glenn. One was that the healing and awakening that those people experienced while they were learning to coach other people was phenomenal. So in becoming a coach, they got coached, so to speak, and the healing energy that came through them to other people ended up healing them as well. Yeah. So I thought, this is pretty cool. And the other piece is that they bonded and fell in love with each other and sort of formed a spiritual family that carried on for many, many years. So I've done this for 10 years now, and we've trained probably 500 people. And basically, we call it holistic life coach training. And basically, we're training people to work with other people who are looking for help, either to solve a problem or to attain a goal. And one of the key aspects of the program, as you know, we've been in for a while now, is that we define the client as wise. Yeah. And the coach is not a therapist or an authority figure or a guru or a savior or a psychic. The coach is basically somebody who's drawing forth the inner greatness of the client that's already there and helping the client to find solutions from their own toolkit rather than leaning on the coach to tell them what to do. Yeah. And we've had phenomenal success. The client's reports and the coach's reports are just stunning. I was reading one the other night, and this lady who was a client said, I've had 50 coaching sessions, but this is the first one that really worked. And I believe it's because my coaches honor the wisdom and divinity of the client and recognize that God speaks to clients directly instead of needing to go through the coach. Yeah. And so and then it frees the coach of having to be an answer person, which is very liberating too. So it's just a nutshell of what we do. And it's so rewarding to see lives changing before my very eyes, the coaches and the clients. I never get tired of it. It only keeps getting better and better.
Yeah. Can you talk about this healing process? So you mentioned that as your coaches are learning how to coach, they are healing as there is healing that's going on with their clients as well. What does this healing look like? What's being healed?
Well, you said it yourself earlier. You said that a miracle is a shift in perception. And it's basically a shift from fear to love. So as a coach works with the client to help them shift their perception, the coach has to shift into higher perception, him or herself as well. You have to raise to a new consciousness to have a result. Einstein said you cannot solve a problem at the same level of mind that created it. You're aware of that. And so the coach and client are both rising to a higher mind that sees the problem from expanded perspective, where you start to see solutions you cannot see when you're in the muck, so to speak, of the problem itself. And so it's really, healing is a state of consciousness you step into. It's a mindset. I quote the Bible not from a religious standpoint, but I think there's great metaphysics in it. I think Peter came to Jesus with certain doubts, and Jesus said to him, Peter, he says, "You're thinking as a man thinks, not as God thinks." So when we think as people think, we get mucked up, but as we think as God thinks, which is expansive, it's unlimited, it's pure love, it's unconditional, it's it's magnificence. So as we raise our mind into that consciousness, so then we see things we never would have seen from a fear base.
Yeah.
And that's what a coach does with a client. So they both get lifted and both walk away happy.
Yeah. When I started learning the techniques that you teach, they're pretty simple. They sound pretty simple. You listen, you actively listen, you restate so that the client knows, that you're hearing, and make sure that you get it. You validate them, you reframe it. And I when I first got it, I'm like, is that it? Really? That's what this is? But in practicing it, it's so powerful. And sometimes it can be really tedious to go, oh, I'm going to restate what somebody says before I just rush in and say, well, here's what I think about it. And then the more I do that, the more distance I put between even saying what I think about it and like being really interested in what they think about what they're hearing back about what they're saying. It's amazing to watch. It's amazing to experience that. So I've loved that. And in I've had the privilege, and it really, really is a privilege to talk with many of the listeners of this podcast that, they've been listening to me for who knows how long they've been listening to me, but to really have a one-on-one conversation, and for me to get to know who they are, what their challenges are, what their issues are. And when they look to me to say, well, what can you do? Like, I'm working with one guy right now who wants to be more spiritual in his life. He says, I think you've got something that you can help me with. And I go, well, I think that you've got something that's bringing you here. Let's find out what that is. And I appreciate that you see this in me, but let's bring it out in you. And it's been really, just wonderful.
It's holy. I think one of the keys is, it's simple kindness and caring and love. So I come to you as a client, and maybe nobody else in my life is listening to me. My husband or wife doesn't pay attention to what I'm saying, really, and they do what they want to do. And my boss doesn't honor me, and my kids are doing their own thing, and I feel unheard. And so I come to you, and you actually listen to me, and you demonstrate to me that you heard what I said, and you make me important by listening, and you validate me by recognizing my struggles and my strengths. And it's like, wow, I don't get this anyplace else in my life. Let me talk to this guy, and let me feel worthy.
Yeah.
This man actually thinks I'm a worthy person. Wow, I want to talk to him. And of course, in that presence of kindness and caring, healing happens naturally, because truly, love is the great healer. Everything else is commentary.
Yeah, and I think especially if you're coming out of a place where you don't feel innately worthy, and then you start to go, oh, maybe I am worthy, that's part of that healing that happens, kind of unconditioning some of that conditioning that we talked about earlier.
Well, I know you deal with people in the Mormon community, and God bless Mormonism. There's a lot of great things about it. But like all religions, there's a lot of guilt and shame and unworthiness that's imposed upon folks.
Yeah.
And that's debilitating. That's damaging. And so if you've been invalidated for many years by a religion or a family or community, and you show up to a coach who actually sees the good in you, whoa, how healing is that?
Yeah.
And so simple validation of the inherent worth of a human being, regardless of their actions, regardless of their religion, that is transformational. That's what's going to save the world, not running off to a mountaintop to be saved because you're one of the 144,000 who's going to be saved. Everybody else is going to hell.
Right.
Sitting in the presence of another person who really respects you, that's holy.
Yeah. All right. In the little time we have left, I want to play a little game with you, maybe. You mentioned Peter coming to Jesus with doubt, and that reminded me of the story of when Jesus walks on the water, one of the miracles. And I recently heard a song that was singing about that, and I had this thought about what that story means to me. Of course, it's being interpreted through my academic background as a folklorist and all of these things. But I was really excited by the way that I interpreted the story, and I went to see if I could find anybody else who had ever interpreted this way, and I couldn't find it. So I want to explain it to you, Alan, and see Have
Yeah,
you heard
let's
this
hear.
before?
Well, let's hear.
Uh,
Try me.
because that whole Voltaire quote that you came up with earlier,
Yeah.
I came up with that on my own too before I ever heard about Voltaire, about how we
Oh,
create
cool.
God in
Right
our
on.
image.
So you're tuned
So I'm
in.
tuned in, or whatever I am. So so you've got this story where there are disciples that are on a boat that are on the Sea of Galilee. Things are calm, and then they're not. There's this storm, and they get terrified that the boat's going to capsize in this storm. And they look out, and they see Jesus walking on the water towards them. And I think, if I remember it right, as soon as they see him, the calm storms, or he raises his hands and the calm storms, or the storm calms. And as he's walking towards them, I think there's 4 different versions of this story in the New Testament, and at least in one of them, maybe it's in 2. Peter says, "Can I join you out on the water?" He says, "Sure, come out." And Peter starts walking on the water too, but then he gets afraid and filled with doubt, and he
Mm.
starts to drown. And Jesus
Mm.
reaches out, and he saves him, but then he kind of rebukes him a little bit. "Oh, you have little faith." And there was something about him coming onto the ship as well. Anyway, so the way that I thought about this story as a metaphor or an allegory, going back to this idea of source energy that is the energy behind all of the atoms, molecules, everything that exists, that God in that story isn't just represented by Jesus, who is the personification of God, but God is also the ship. God is also the people that are doubting. God is also the storm that is raging. And the real lesson is that when you understand and accept that all of this around you is God, that it
Mm.
calms the storm, it soothes the storm. But
Mm.
if you get out on the water and you start thinking that, oh, I am going to be the all-powerful, mighty God, then you recognize, well, that's not really, you're not really that, and you get filled with doubt and fear,
Mm.
and you start to sink. So there's kind of like this happy medium on accepting being in the presence of God around us and not having fear and otherwise. Have you ever heard that
Well, that
interpretation before?
works. Haven't heard it, but it
Okay.
works. It's a good one.
All right. Maybe Voltaire said it at some point. It just never gotten written down. It's possible.
It works.
All
No, you can write the next testament. It's fine with me.
right. Yeah, I might.
There are a lot of testaments. I think there's something like 70 or 80 of them. Just got a few of them got picked.
Yeah.
So, we're all choosing the testament we're living in at a moment.
Yeah, that's true.
At
Yeah.
a given moment. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So if any of my listeners are interested in hearing you, I know you do a weekly radio show. You've got a website. You do the training for coaches. Where can they find you if they want to
Go
get
to
in
my
touch with you?
website, alancohen.com, 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 and all the stuff you mentioned is available right there.
Okay. And are you doing a weekly radio show as well that they could listen to?
Yeah, actually, we're just moving to a new station. If people go online and look up Unity Radio Online, they'll find as of January 2020, I'll be doing a new show there.
All right.
And before we close, Glenn, I want to really honor you for the work that you're doing. You're really a bridge. And my teacher used to say that people who trample down a certain path in the weeds, make the path clear and available to other people. So you've gone through your crisis of faith and your dark night of the soul, you might say, regarding Mormonism. And I really respect you for coming into your own integrity and being honest about what works and choosing your own life instead of the life that others would choose for you. And I do respect Mormonism, but I also respect you for stepping out of it and claiming a higher path for yourself. And you're really helping a lot of people who are walking that path. And I just want to encourage your listeners to be in integrity with yourself. And my definition of integrity is that the life that you're living on the outside matches who you are on the inside. And so I also want to encourage our listeners to just, drop into your heart and ask, what do you really believe and what is really true for you? And if you were living from joy and celebration and honesty and integrity and creativity, what would that life look like? Independent of the life that others have told you you're supposed to live, independent of the life you've lived, what would a life of true you, authentic, be? and there you have your path. That's the path that's been illumined for you. I would trust that. I would just deeply trust that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Alan. As you were saying that, it reminded me of the documentary that you're a part of, Finding Joe, that talks about Joseph Campbell and the power of myth. And I don't know if it was you that it was one of the other contributors that was talking about walking the path into the forest, and that you actually that on the hero's journey, you don't walk on the path that other people have walked on before. You forge your own. And I think that is part of that integrity, part of that, but it's also part of the fear of going into the unknown and not being sure, am I going to be okay? Am I going to come out of this on the other side? And really the power that comes when you take that leap of faith, and then you see what have you created for yourself. And
fear prescribes a circle around us. And it says, you dare not step out of the circle or else you will die. And the truth is, when you step out of the circle, you live. And that's the leap of faith we were just talking about.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Alan.
My honor. Please keep what you're doing. You're helping a lot of people. And it's my honor to get to know you and share my program with you, dear brother.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Now, if you would like to support Infants on Thrones, please come and join us on Patreon, where for as little as $1 per month, you can say thank you for the time that it takes to create this podcast, as well as access even more great content like this. I think there are maybe 72 episodes right now that are only available to Patreon subscribers, so come join us on Patreon today. And if you're interested in life coaching and would like to have a private, confidential, one-on-one conversation with me, Glenn Ostland, shoot me an email at infantsonthrones@gmail.com, and we'll set up a free consult to see if coaching would be a good fit for you. Thank you again for listening to Infants on Thrones.
Pretty bird, pretty bird. Hey, this is Billy in 4C from Rhode Island. Yes, that's right. The blind kid from Dumb and Dumber, and now Dumb and Dumber 2. Yes, a pseudo-celebrity Mormon. Infants on Thrones has helped me come to grips with the tragedy that I've seen. Well, heard about at least, when learning that the thing that mattered most to me ended up being dead all along. I mean, Petey didn't even have a head. If you heart the show as much as I do, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Write a short review, and oh my heck, why not post about it on the social media? Unless you're still stuck in the Relief Society closet about your faith transition stuff like I am. And always remember, I just thought he was real quiet. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Oh my, the congregation in my mind is this assembly singing of gratitude, practicing their loving for you. Live high, live mighty, live righteously. Taking it easy, live high. I say live high, oh, live righteously. Just take it easy.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.